Hello everyone and welcome to another video with me, FlyJSim Pilot, and today we're taking a look at the FlyJSim Q4XP, Dash8 Q400 for XP11, and what we're doing today is taking a look at how we can land it. This has been one of the most commonly asked questions about this aircraft. I did used to fly the Q400 in real life. I now of course fly the Airbus in real life, but I've remembered a few things from it, and I'm trying to remember some more as we get to grips with this fantastic, highly detailed add-on for XP11. So today we're going to go through just some of the things about landing the Q400 that make it so unique. It is a particularly challenging aircraft to land, there's no doubt about it. Anyone who's flown it knows this, and anyone who's been a passenger on it probably knows this as well. There's a few quirks to it that do make it tricky in some circumstances. That's not to say less safe or anything like that, just to get a smooth landing is a slightly different technique, and even to get a safe landing is not the same as landing a jet aircraft. So we're going to give it a go. Right, we are downwind at Gatwick. Aircraft is pretty much set up for the approach. I won't be covering approach setups too much today. We'll just look at our flying ILS, and we're going to look at the technique for the flare and touchdown. Let's get started. Before we do, I'd just like to remind you about our partnership with Apex Gaming PCs. We have our very own line of custom FlyJSim Pilot gaming PCs focused on flight simulation, of course. There are two options, the Bus or the Manta, both with excellent processors, and of course you can customize them on the website before ordering. I did help in the original specification for the two versions you see there, but you can of course customize them further. But most excitingly, we have a sale, 10% off until the 31st of Jan 2022 by using code FlyJSim Pilot. You'll also be supporting the channel if you buy one. So here we are now, just downwind, as you can see here on Avitab. I'll just make that a bit bigger for you. We are routing downwind, and we're going to make a right turn in to land on runway 26 left at Gatwick. I've tuned in the ILS DME course 258, frequency 110.9. So down here you can see 258 and 110.9. For those of you not sure how to fly an ILS in this, it's very simple. We need to set the course bar to 258, and we set the frequency down here in the ArcDo 110.9. To change the frequency, you click on it, and then you use this wheel to control the standby one, and press it again to swap it over. So I'm going to have it set to both sides, 110.9 and the 258 course, and now it will fly the ILS. It's very simple. I have put in the arrival, but it's not really tied up in the FMS at all. So this is going to be a bit more of a raw data approach. But anyway, that's not the point of today's video. So let's talk about setting up for the approach. Well, there's basically only two things we need to do. First of all, we're going to make sure that we know which flap we're landing at, and they are completely different techniques. There's a flap 15 and a flap 35. The flap 10 option you see here is abnormals only, really. So flap 15 or flap 35. You'll notice even on the little diagram over here, which is our flap indicator, there's a huge gap between 15 and 35 because it is a massive difference. They are completely different techniques. So to start off with, let's look at flap 15. So I'm going to set it on the GPWS panel. If we don't, the airplane will shout at us too low flaps because it will think we haven't got our required landing flap set up. So we also, as well as setting GPWS to 15, we need to make sure we have the speeds. If you've loaded up the box with the correct weights, so you can see the weight here on the perf page 24388, which is below max landing weight, I can click on the lower part of the speed tape and it puts in 137.117. 117 is going to be our VREF. It's going to be the speed at which we don't want to go any slower on approach, but we can increase the speed slightly if performance permits. But 117 is fine. If I change it to 35 and I click here, you'll see it drops to 112. So there's only 5 knot speed difference, and you're going to see why that's a problem later. But the add-on does this automatically. It's very good. So 117 is going to be our VAP. So I'm going to aim to fly the approach at 117 to 117 plus 10, and there's a reason I say to plus 10. It's quite a high tolerance, that, but it all depends on the performance, what you're doing. But we're landing on a long runway. So why would we choose flap 15 or flap 35? Well, on a nice long runway in relatively smooth winds, I would choose a flap 15. The reason is the aeroplane lands quite nicely, there's not as much of a flare to do, and it's less drag and less noise, so it uses less fuel, so it's more efficient. So we often like landing flap 15 if we have that option, which we do today. If we had a short runway, it'll be a flap 35 landing, which means we have to have more power on, and we'll talk about that later. Right, let's turn to our base leg now and get ready to come in for our approach. So that really is the most basic things you need to do. I'm sure there's lots I've forgotten, and as ever, I haven't flown this aircraft in a few years. If you are a real world Q400 pilot, I apologise. Thank you for watching, and I apologise for the things I'm going to have forgotten. So let's talk about configuring. Well, the Dash8 has big propellers out on the wing, obviously, which provide a lot of drag. We don't have any spoilers, but it does mean that if we bring the flight power levers straight to flight idle, the airplane will slow down very quickly, unlike a jet aircraft. Look at that. It just stops straight away. So we have the option to delay putting out our flaps until slightly later than a conventional jet aircraft would probably choose to do it. What I'm going to do is slow down. Once I'm on my intercept heading, I'm going to slow down to about 170 knots, which will be my maybe 175 knots as a minimum clean speed. You can see here at 190 we have no problem being completely clean. Let's skip ahead now until we're basically on the ILS. Okay, coming in now on our base intercept. Still completely clean, flaps are up, and I'm going to arm the approach. All very normal. Press approach, and we have localizer in white and glide slope in white, so they're armed and ready. You'll notice we're starting from just 3,000 feet, so pretty low down. And it's going to intercept the ILS just like most commercial aircraft do. For configuring, once we're on the localizer or a bit closer in, I can put out flap 5, and you'll see that the speed limits are over here. The flap 5 speed limit is 200 knots. Flap 10, 181. Flap 15, 172. Flap 35, 158. Now they're not displayed on the speed tape, so this does make this a bit of a challenge. So we do have to be careful to remember these speeds ourselves. So we're going to go to flap 5, and then once we're ready to configure further, so we can stay on the glide slope flap 5, descending towards the runway, and it's not until we are a bit closer in, maybe around 5 miles, I'll go gear down, and then flaps to 15. And then that'll be it. That'll be the landing configuration ready. So there's lock star, and we're going to turn in, and I'll speak to you again once we are about to intercept the glide slope. At this point, I'd just like to point out the conditions for this landing are basically a 10 knot headwind, so very calm, favourable conditions. Also, thank you to Bounce from Discord for making this livery for the FlyJSim Q4XP. It's great to have it in our bright neon pink and blue colours, so thank you for that. And of course, I'm doing my best here to remember, but there may be mistakes as this was years since I flew it. So here we are now, lined up on the localizer, shortly descending. This may go quite quickly, so obviously you might want to pause and rewind the next stage of the approach a couple of times. But here's the next steps. We are still clean, so when I see the glide slope coming down, I'm going to go to flap 5. This isn't a rule, this is just how I'm going to do it today. Once we're coming down the glide slope, I'm going to configure a bit early today, so we'll go to gear down, then flap 15, which will be our landing configuration. Once we've done that, I'm going to press reduced NP landing. NP is this, the propeller RPM, at those big propellers at the front of the engine. So here's the glide slope. Let's configure. So we're below 200 knots, flaps to 5. Now we can start reducing the speed a bit. Nothing wrong with coming down the glide slope, 180, 160 knots. The airplane will have no trouble with that. But you would of course notice that any large power changes here will cause you real headaches. So there is a way to fly the Dash on approach without having to change the power hardly at all. And you just use the drag from the gear and flaps to slow you down. If you ever have to come to complete flight idle, that's a sign that yeah, you're running quite high on energy, because you just get so much drag if you do that. Right, glide slope star, here we go, and the airplane's going to start down. I'll leave 3,000 feet, and if we go around, we'll make that left turn. So, trickling the power off a little bit, and down the glide slope we come. So let's slow down to 160 knots, and then configure from there. So as I said, the next step will be gear down, flap 15. If we do flap 15 first, you'll actually get the gear warning horn. So we're going to put the gear out before we put the flap out. That way the airplane will be happy. So let's do that now. So gear down. You'll notice the red lever comes down. You have to actually push that down before you can move this. So you get used to having to maneuver your hand around to make that work. And there we go, 3 greens. So gear down, 3 greens. And we're now below the flap 15 limit speed, which, as we can check over here, is 172. I'm trying to remember that myself. So let's go to flap 15. And I'm going to set approach power. I can set that now because the drag of the gear and the flaps will bring us there. So I reckon it's going to be something like, we're at 25 tons, so I'm going to try 15%, but let's see where that ends up. And you can see the airplane gradually reducing speed. If you're back at flight idle again, it will just decelerate so quickly. Something I forgot to do earlier was bring the condition levers back to 850. So normally, there we go, you'd have the condition levers at 850 RPM, and this is where you'd have flown the approach. Now that it's possible to fly at 1020, there's no problem with that. We might have done that for drag reasons or anything like that, but there we go, 850 is quieter. That tends to be how we fly from the cruise, all of the descent and the approach. So they'd be here at 850. Doesn't matter where they were, but that's a normal configuration. So what we can do now is press the reduced NP button, which keeps them at 850, and then if we're quick enough, we bring the condition levers up to the maximum, but you see it says reduced NP and it keeps them at 850. I'm going to need a bit more power. I can see we're not going to quite manage that. Maybe it's about 25. Let's try 25. I must have had the wrong numbers in my head there. 25 seems like a sensible number. Yeah, so they're going to stay at 850. If we go around or add too much power, it'll automatically increase the RPM to what we need on its own, which is great news. Just going to get a little bit low on the glide slope. So that's the airplane pretty much configured for landing now. The gear's down. We're at flat 15, which is our landing flap. And we've got the condition levers to max, which is where they need to be, so that the airplane can get full power if it needs it. So let's talk about the actual landing now. So problems with the Dash8 that make it so challenging. It's too long, this airplane. It's got that real long tail. So what happens is that little bump here is very low to the ground on landing. You'll notice that we've got a pitch attitude of somewhere 2 or 3 degrees, and if I bring the power back and we get right back to VAP, or sorry, to VREF, then the nose will come right up to 5 degrees. That is our pitch limit for landing. We have to be at 5 degrees or less for landing to avoid the risk of a tail strike. I'm just going to pause it here. I don't normally do this, but I will pause it for this video. So yeah, we can't let the nose come too far up. So if we're slow, we're going to have a tail strike, which is really bad news. The result is, even though, as you can see, I'm a little bit fast here, 125 instead of 117, that's a fair bit fast, still within limits, but if we now try to land, we've only got 2-3 degrees to flare, which is not a lot. So we have to be careful with the flare. It's not a big flare, it's just a little check of the nose. As a result, we don't want to do it too late. If you do it in the last 5 feet, you know, it's not going to work. This is still an airliner. It does have some weight to it. So we have to flare maybe 20 to 30 feet. We just want to start getting that nose up, but not too much. It's all about a balance. So your other pilot in real life would obviously call out if you reach the 5 degree pitch. It's quite likely you will reach it or be very close to it. So how are we going to solve this one? Well, you're not going to reduce power. We're going to fly the aircraft to the runway with power on, probably the approach power setting. So I've got about 23, something like that. Whatever you're using on final is probably what you're going to leave right up to touchdown. So we're going to leave the approach power setting on, go into our flare, which is a small flare at about 20 feet, just to raise the nose a couple of degrees, not past 5 degrees, and then we just let it settle on the runway. And this does make it a challenging thing to do. We also don't want to bring them to flight idle until the main gear has touched down. So even in the flare, we're not going to bring those power levers to flight idle. We do that after main gear touchdown. Otherwise, it's just too much drag and you'll really come crashing out of the sky. So we're going to flare, let the aircraft touch down, bring the power levers to flight idle. Once they're at flight idle and we've lowered the nose, then we can bring them to disc. So the nose gear also needs to be on the ground. If you are to touch down with the main gear, you bring it to flight idle, that's fine. But if you try to put it into disc before the nose wheel's down, you'll notice that the propellers are very big and there's actually quite a lot of propeller above you. So what will happen is this will become like a brake and it will pull the nose of the airplane back up again and you're back at risk of a tail strike. So the sequence is around 20 to 30 feet we start our flare, leave the power where it is, let the main gear touch down. Once that's touched down, power levers to flight idle, let the nose gear gently touch down. And there's nothing, we don't hold it off or anything like that. We just let it settle onto the runway. We don't push it forward either, obviously. Just let that settle onto the runway. And then as soon as the nose gear's down, we can bring the propellers into disc. That's all you're going to need to bring it to a stop quickly. You also have manual brakes. There's no auto brake on this aircraft. But disc and a bit of light manual braking will slow down very quickly. Right, let's give it a go. So I'm going to unpause. It's obviously crucial to have a stable approach in this aircraft, as you can imagine. So if we're slow, just bin it, go around, because you cannot afford to be slow on a flat 15 landing, especially. It's going to cause you real headaches. We also need to make sure that we have the power setting correct, because if let's say you're fast here, so you lower the power setting and then you try and flare and you forget about it, you could find that you run out of energy too quickly, all sorts of different things. So having a stable power setting is just crucial to bringing this aircraft in, because of course there is no auto thrust. Right, let's turn off the autopilot. You notice it's off to the right, a bit of rudder trim needed there. There we go. Leaving the power alone, so 23 seems to be working for us here. As you see, we get a bit low, so I raise the nose to try and get back to that glide slope, and straight away I'm at 5 degrees of pitch. We've already run out. So I don't want to fiddle too much. We could destabilize ourselves. It's going to need a bit of power added. Very small power changes though. This aircraft is very powerful and it doesn't need you to go too mad. Now the glide slope does go a little bit sensitive in X-Plane, like a lot of simulators. So let's just reset the power we wanted. We said about 23, there's 24. And let's go into our flare.
50, 40,
30, flare, 5 degrees,
10,
holding it there. There's touchdown, flight idle, lower the nose, and disc. And you see that nose tried to come up. I didn't have it properly down there. So even when I knew about it, I managed to get that effect. So we leave it at disc. Bit of manual braking here. And we'll have no trouble getting off at this exit. So, of course, let's have a look at the replay. So, we're just at about, 140 feet. So, let's press play. And you'll see here, started to destabilize a little bit, and it does unravel quickly in this airplane. So, instead of following the glide slope, just looking out the window, because we can see we're going to make it into the touchdown zone. 30 entering the flare, but we quickly reach 5 degrees of pitch. So, just holding it there, keeping the power where it was. There's main gear touchdown. Power levers to flight idle. Get the nose down. Wasn't fully down when I put it into disc, so the nose tried to come up, but that's my fault. And there we go, it slows down. I see they fixed the prop RPM issue, which is great. It used to overspeed on landing, but which the real aircraft didn't. But there we go. So, having a look from the outside, if we look at 5 degrees of pitch, how did that treat us for the tail? So there we were in the flare, just a few inches from touchdown. So you can see the nose is okay, but the tail is okay. But what you've got to remember is we are currently with the shock absorbers fully extended. We're going to touch down now. Spoilers come up and it sinks down eventually. And I've already got the nose coming down, but that's the risk, is that it will sink down onto these shock absorbers and bring that tail into contact with the runway. So that's why the 5 degree limit. You won't actually tail strike at 5 degrees, obviously. I think it's 7 or 8, something like that. But yeah, it's still a pretty close thing. So that's why we leave the power where it is, because we just don't have any pitch to play with. And you do have the option. It's not supposed to be like this, but if you need to, you have the option to increase the power at this point. So some pilots would now... well, you can see we're about 24%. They might start squeezing on power if they needed to reduce the rate of descent, because of course we've run out of options. We've got 5 degrees of pitch, which is all we're going to get. It's going to be a safe landing, 400 feet per minute. You know, it's not going to be a hard landing. But if you needed to just soften it a little bit more, you might add some power. The magic of the Dash8 is that, of course, if we added power now, not only do the engines respond very quickly because they're turboprop engines, but when they do respond, that air from them, unlike a jet, which just pushes you forwards to get you air over the wings, they actually push the air right over the wings as well. So as soon as you add power, you get an instant increase in power and lift off the wings straight away. You don't have to wait for the aircraft to actually gain energy. So it's very sensitive. So small power changes on final, certainly. And you don't want to add a lot if you need to add power. But as you saw, even in this situation, that's fine. That's all we're going to want to get out of it. That's a safe landing in the touchdown zone. Just adding that, just leaving the power alone, and just making sure you're stable before that. That's the key, really. Be stable and leave the power. So for this next approach, we're just downwind into Gatwick again, turning onto base leg for the ILS. For this one, of course, we're going to do a flap 35. So there we go, 35 degrees. And what's different? Well, let's click here to get the new speeds. So 110 now, we've burned a bit of fuel, we're a bit lighter. And we're going to configure in a similar way. So we'll go flap 5, then we'll go gear down flap 15. But of course, we have one last stage of flap to put out, flap 35, which we can only do when we're below 158 knots. So then that's the only difference, really. When would I do that? Well, whenever you see fit. Certainly before 500 feet, so that you're stable at 500 feet. So anywhere up, around 1,000 feet, maybe a bit earlier. Airlines will have different SOPs on when they want you to be fully stable. But again, it's going to require a really stable final approach for this to work. So we need to have that flap out fully configured in a reasonable time, so that the final approach has a stable power setting and speed. So let's jump to that point. Just for a little bit of fun on this approach, I'm going to show you just how powerful the deceleration is in the Dash 8 over other aircraft. So we're back at 850 RPM, which would be normal. But if you know you're high or fast in the Dash 8, if you bring the propeller levers forward, you'll get much better braking action. So as you can see, we're now passing 9 miles, 230 knots. We are level, but still, this is a pretty sporty situation to be in for an airliner. But it's not going to be an issue today. I'm just going to bring these through the flight idle. There we go. And then the speed is just going to wash right off. And if we really want to slow down, we can bring the condition levers to max. And you see that trend arrow there? And that's just so quick at slowing down. So look at that, 7 miles, 210 knots. This won't be an issue. And then again, I know we're level. I'll show this on the stream at some point, perhaps. Even if you were descending, it would be possible. I'm not recommending this. But there we go, below 200 knots, flaps to 5. No problem there. So flap 5 we've got. We could go to flap 10. We don't really use flap 10, or certainly I don't remember using it much. Maybe it's used more now. And now we can go to flap 15, just as we reach the glide slope. So already it's all fixed. I'm actually going to add some power again. And let's bring the props back to 850. Okay, so 160 knots, flap 5, pretty normal situation. Bring that heading bug round. And we're about to reach the glide slope. There it is, glide slope star. Let's put the go around altitude into the window. I just used 3,000 feet today. And we start down. So let's configure. So, as we said, gears down, flaps to 15. Hear that gear horn? Temporary, because we put flap 15 before we got 3 greens. Not a problem, but yeah, there we go. And now, the final stage, we're below 150, was it 158 knots? Yep, so we can go to flap 35. So here's the thing, you mustn't be, well, if you're at flight idle and you put flap 35 out, it is a huge amount of drag. So you need to be really careful here that you don't do anything silly. So you can see this power's at 20, flaps 35. I've actually got the old landing page left on here, so you can ignore that. And there we go. Even with the power there, whereas before it was obviously sitting still, the speed will wash right back. And we're going to be nicely stable before 1,000 feet. So the same sort of thing. 110 is our slowest speed. I want to be somewhere between 110 and 120 knots. Now, flap 35, it's okay to be at your approach speed because we're not worried about the tail striking situation so much this time. It's sort of a reverse of all the problems we had with the flap 15. This is why a lot of people, certainly who fly the Dash 8, would like to see a flap setting between 15 and 35 because that would just be perfect, probably for most landings. So as we said earlier, we're probably going to use a flap 35 landing for situations such as short runways, things like that. But it was also useful in turbulence. If you had strong crosswinds, some pilots preferred flap 35, some like 15. So there we go. We're bang on VAP. We're on the glide slope now. Just let it settle. But you're going to find that power setting probably another 10% higher. So we were about 23 last time. So I'm guessing about 33 for this one. This is all very rough memory though. That might be a little bit too much. Actually, speed's increasing. Okay, so let's pause it here and talk about the landing. What's different? So here we go. We're slightly fast, but the nose is low. It's going to be below 0, which is quite common. The airplane will be nose low all the way down the approach like this. We're going to have more power on, which is obviously a bit noisier, but no other real considerations for that. We're going to do the same thing. We can press reduced MP and bring the condition levers to max. So that doesn't really matter too much. Let's do that now, in fact. So I'm going to press reduced MP. There's the message. Bring those to max. Don't worry if you forget that, but that's what you're supposed to do, or you could just put them straight to max anyway. But yeah, so we are now coming in, obviously, nose low. So the risk here is that we're going to land nose gear first, and that was actually a more common issue than tail striking the Dash 8 because people are very aware of the tail strike risk, but the nose gear wheelbarrowing one is very easy to do, especially in sort of windy conditions. But there we go, flap 35, look at that, big flaps out there, looks great. So no problem coming in nose low on the approach, but what we have to do to land is obviously get the power back so we can get the nose up. So instead of leaving the power alone, we're going to do very similar things. We're going to fly down the approach. Then when we get to about 30 feet, we'll start our flare just as before. But this time, as we raise the nose, we're going to simultaneously trickle the power back. You see, we've got quite a lot of power on. So we're going to trickle it back, not to flight idle. We don't idle the engines because you've got a huge amount of drag out there. If you idle them, you've got the propeller drag and now those big flaps in the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to trickle it back just a bit, and it's just a judgment call as you trickle the power back, and you're going to have to practice this a few times to sort of get the hang of it. You trickle the power back and raise the nose to make sure the airplane doesn't fly level, of course. And if you find you're starting to go back up again, you know, you've got too much power on or too much speed. So crucially, we've got to be at the right speed as we enter this maneuver. If we're fast and we pull the nose up to flare, we're just going to go back up again. I'll level off. And we need to be able to get the nose up because, of course, if we don't, we're going to land on that nose gear. So if we're too fast, we have the nose gear risk as well. So yeah, it would be really nice to have a flap setting just in between. So let's get this landing done and see how it goes. So again, making sure we're definitely stable. Same technique though. Once we have the main gear touched down, that's when we can bring the power levers to flight idle. Once the nose gear is down, we can bring them to disc. So that sort of sequence stays exactly the same. We do not flight idle them in the air. Right, let's get the power back on. That's looking pretty stable there. Right, autopilot off. Leaving it alone, keeping it as stable as we can. So you can see I've got a few knots above the app. We're at 115, 5 knots fast, but that's not too much of an issue. It's not quite like the Airbus where you'd fly it, well, the auto thrust flies it to the knot. So, over the threshold.
50, 40, 30,
Into the flare and trickling the power back.
10,
Nose up. There's touchdown, idle, get the nose down, and disc. Oh, didn't get there. Didn't press the buttons right there. Finally, we reached disc. Bit of brakes here. Probably still make this exit anyway. And there we go. That is a touchdown, flap 35. Let's have a look at the replay. So here we are at about 100 feet, and you can see the nose is pretty much below the horizon. We still have a negative pitch attitude. So this is the thing we're going to have to solve as we go into the flare.
50, 40,
There's 30
30,
feet there, or even 20, and you can see the pitch has now just about reached zero. This is still no good. We need to have the nose slightly above the horizon, but we'll just about get away with it. The Dash8 does have a slight nose down attitude on the ground. You can see here that actually probably the main gear would touch down first, even from a completely flat landing as it were, but that's still not ideal. I want to get the nose up slightly.
20,
And see the power? It's just reduced 20, 21, and there's the touchdown. So the power reduction I talked about wasn't a lot. If we look at that again,
20, 30, 40, 50,
we're at 29% the whole way
40,
into the flare. Nose comes up, power comes back. So I go from about 29 to 21, and there's touchdown. So that's all it takes.
10, 20, 30,
But you do have to remove that power. Otherwise, the airplane will just float along, or you'll have to land on the nose gear, which is obviously no good at all. So, as we said, 30 feet into the flare,
30, 20,
up the nose comes, power comes back, holds it there. There's touchdown was at about a pitch of about 3 degrees. So there you go. No problem for that. And again, this is just we're not trying to get the smoothest landing ever here. This is just a technique to hopefully see you through. I'm just going to point out now that the winds for this video were done with, I think it's about a 10 knot headwind, so pretty benign conditions. Crosswinds are a whole other topic, of course, and will be saved for a future video. I did mention on approach that it's the same thing with the power levers as the flat 15. So you're flying down, all fine, you've got a bit of power on, as we said, I've said a million times by this point. We trickle the power back as we raise the nose. You leave some power on, main gear touches down, now you bring the power levers to flight idle, you get the nose gear down, and then you bring the power levers to disc. And that's where the real braking comes. You can see it took me a long time to get to disc because I didn't quite press the buttons right. There we go. And that's where you get the huge amount of deceleration. But that's exactly the same sequence as for a flat 15. So that's all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been helpful for you. Thank you to Bounce on Discord for creating this livery for the FlyJSim Q4XP. It's yeah, excellent, great bit of fun. Really nice to see the Dash8 in our colours. And there'll be more guides and tutorials on obviously the Airbus, as well as some more Dash8 content coming to the channel, of course, and plenty of live streams. So do please subscribe if you'd like to see more of that. Today's video is a bit of a tricky one because, of course, I'm not up to date with the Q400, and it's something I'm not flying for a few years. So I apologise if anything was missing. It's not intentional. I'm just doing my best to help out those of you who are trying to sort out some of the stranger parts of the Dash8, and landing certainly counts as one of those. It's got many different differences to jet aircraft. That's all then. Thank you again for watching. We'll see you in another video or live stream very soon. Bye bye.